We're now on the top of Chav Daled Amud Beis, and we said that Rabbi Bar Shimi could also defend himself with the same logic, that there's going to be quarrels over here because the father represents his son, and he feels that since he offered his son to read the maftir, that he, the father, having done so out of the bottom of his heart, he deserves the key. And now you're going to take it away from the shots, and the shots is getting paid for that. So we're talking about a person who's not totally clad, and he's allowed to be Poris al Shema, he's allowed to be Mitargim the Torah, he's not allowed to read the Torah. So boy mine ulabar Rav me'abaye katan pocheach ma'ushik Torah. If, let's say, the katan is partially exposed, then in that case, is his semi-nakedness, again, he's covering his privates, but is that a pagia in the cover? In other words, when an adult person exposes part of his body, that's not good, because, again, here's Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos exactly why. Tosfos goes with the approach of undermining the covenant at Tzibur. Rashi says there might be a violation of Lo yira b'cha ervas davar. So any nakedness is excluded. Now let me just see if he mentions Machlokes Rashi. Just 1 second. He says the following. Hatam shegadol pochech eino kori b'Torah l'ficha hagadol muzar shelo lomar divrei Torah keneged erva shenemar v'lo yira b'cha ervas dava also likros kriyas shema keneged erva who had been amirat shard from shebikdush. Kevan sheraglov megulos. Again, this has to be taken under advisement. What exactly is pochech? But if you assume raglov megulos, then also lo likos b'Torah. Well, katan ain't a muzar b'isu Torah, and they are mutar hu likro b'Torah. So he's going straight away with Rashi. O chema tam shegol pochech ain't a kori b'shum kabanat tzibur. Second. One second, I'm a little bit confused. Just one second. Thing here. We said before that katan eino kori b'Torah. Do you have any footnote on that, maybe? We said that a katan is not kori b'Torah. So what are we talking about here? Katan pochech. I'm missing one piece of the puzzle. When I prepared this, I didn't realize this, but now it occurred to me as I'm teaching. Sometimes things pop into your brain. Katan pochech ma'ushik Torah. Unless he means the mafti. It says here kori b'Torah. I don't know. We'll have to leave that for post this year because we don't have that much time. Amalei Abai says to Ula, why are you asking about a pocheach who's, exposing, let's say, his legs? Tiboilach orum. Why not ask the question about someone who is basically naked, except he's covering his privates? Hello, what? You have to say that or my time Allah. That obviously we're not going to allow even a katan, if he's arum, to read the Torah. Mishum kavadat tzibur. It's pogei on the kavadat tzibur. So chanam mishum kavadat tzibur. Here too, even if he's not arum, but from the perspective of kavadat tzibur, and we're not talking about a violation of the law of lo yirah b'chol ever stava, we cannot allow him as a pocheach to read the Torah for the Kehillah, for the Tzibur, because that's a Pagiyah in Kavod Tzibur. Again, even though, Abai is making a jump over here from Orum to Bocheach, but basically saying if the issue is not Ervas Davar, but rather the issue is Kavod, then we should also include a Pocheach in Hafkas HaKavod. Summa Pores al Shma. So this suffix of Ula remains an outstanding suffix. Now we have Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah who argues against the Chacham, and he says that with regard to someone who was born blind, he never saw the light of the Ma'oros, he cannot be Pores al Shma. Tanya Amru Lo Rabbi Yehuda. They turned to Rabbi Yehuda and they said, why are you excluding a Summa who never was able to see? I'm going to prove to you that even a Summa who was born blind should be able to be Mavarech Bore Yotzer HaMa'oros. How do I prove it? So the Merkava sections in Yechezkel and Navi, and this is a vision of the Merkava up in Shamayim, the heavenly angels and so forth, the divinity up in Shamayim. And people darshan Maisa Merkava. Again, there are all sorts of restrictions to whom and when you're allowed to be Dorish Maisa Merkava, but V'lo Ro'o Samimea. No one ever saw Maisa Merkava in our time. So what do we derive from this? Why is this going to be a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda? What we're seeing here is that even if you cannot see the Maisa Merkava in this case, you can teach it. You can understand it on a conceptual level. And if that be the case, then even someone who's born blind, he could be Mavarach Yotzam Ma'oros and therefore be Pores al Shma. He never saw the heavenly moon and sun, but nevertheless, he understands that there's something called light. He knows he lives in darkness. Rabbi Yehuda, how's Rabbi Yehuda going to counter against that argument? Chasam. When you talk about Maisa Merkava, the Avanto de Libe Talyumus. Avanto is an Aramaic conjugation of the word Havana. The Havana de Libe of his lave, it depends, meaning it's all conceptual. Merkava is not something physical, it belongs to the spiritual world. He can actually understand Maisa Merkava. He doesn't have to see Maisa Merkava. But Hacha, here when you make the blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzer HaMa'oros Mishum Hanahu, you've got to derive some benefit from the Ma'oros. Otherwise, why are you praising God for the Ma'oros? Well, Leslie Hana, but this man who was blind from birth, he gets no Hana from the Ma'oros. He never ever experienced the Ma'oros. So Rabbanon, how are the Rabbanon going to counter against this argument of Rabbi Yehuda? Islay Hana ki Rabbi Yotzi, even someone who's blind from birth gets Hana from the Ma'oros. Meaning if he can't see, but others can see. And that's critical for him. Tisani, we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Yossi, Kol Yom Ha'isi Mitztara al Mikra Zeh. I always had trouble with the Tochacha of Vayisa Memashmesh Batzarayim Kasha Yimashmesh Al Iver Ba'afelo. You will grope in the middle of the day like a blind man gropes in the darkness. Now, what does it mean by failure? A dark man what's the difference whether you put him in the light of day or you put him in a dungeon room which is closed at all sides? There's not an inch of light coming in. You can't see anyway. So why are you telling me in the pasuk that God is chastising the Jewish people? He says, "What's afela for an iver? It's the difference between afela and or gadol for an iver." So Rabbi Yossi says, for a long time I didn't understand this pasuk. The following thing happened. He's walking in the darkness of night. Imagine, I saw a blind man in the darkness. He's holding on to a torch. What do you gain by carrying a torch? You can't even see it. He responded, as long as I'm holding on to this torch, those who can see, they will help me, guide me, so that I don't fall into ditches, I don't rip my skin with thorns and briars. So Yossi is saying that the pasuk means that as a blind man gropes in utter darkness, when no one can see and thus help him. So in other words, the pasuk and the tocha is adding the words ke. One second. What is the pasuk again? Ke afela. Oh yeah, kasher yimashesh ha'iver b'afela, to indicate that no one could see. Like, there's a double raise on you. Meaning he can't see, and there's no one else who can help him because they can't see either. And they won't be able to save him in a pchasim, in a kotzim, in a barkanim. But if the Iver is able to hold on to a torch, then others can help. And the bottom line is the Chacham hold therefore that a blind person, even if he's blind from birth, can be Poritz al Shema, and he can recite the Bracha Yotzei Ma'oros, because he does get benefit from the light, even though he can't see it, but others can see it, and they'll save him from the thorns and the thistles. The Mishnah says, Kohen sheish biyadav mumon lo yisa kapo. Now, what does the word mum mean? A Kohen has some sort of blemish on his hand. Okay, and he should not be nosius kapo. Is this halach and avoda that he's a balmum? I doubt it. We're not talking about avoda. We're talking about berachas kohen. And this mission should apply even in our time when we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. So Rashi says here the reason why the Mishnah disqualifies the kohen from berachas kohen because of the blemish on his hands is because it's going to distract the people. The people in the audience are going to be looking at this man's hands. The mum biyada. Tosfos doesn't like it because Rashi is applying a Gemara Chagiga rule that if you look at the hands of a kohen when he's blessing, and the Shekhinah is now Shora al Yadav, you could go blind from it. So that's why Tosfos can't tolerate Rashi, because Tosfos holds that what causes blindness when you look at the Kohen to be Mavaret, that's because of Hashras HaShekhinah. Hashras HaShekhinah only applies in the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore Tosfos says that why is this Kohen excluded from the Siyas Kapayim? It's because people get distracted from the bracha. See that it's very important to listen carefully to the bracha. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af Misha Hayu Yadav Tzvuos Satis Lo Yisas Kap. So if he has a dye on his hand, it's a bluish dye. Then that's enough. In some Mishnayos it says pur istimu pur. The pur is a red dye. The people are going to stare at his hands. They're so curious about these blue dyes and red, red markings on his hands. They'll get distracted. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, mumim sha'amru b'panav yadav arad. So when we talk about disqualifying the Kohen, because he's got a mum, that mum would be either in his face, or in his hands, or in his feet. Rabbi Shimon Levi yadav bo'akanios lo yisas kapah. So this is like a leopard, he has spotted hands. And Tanya Namiyochi Yodov Ba'akanios Lo Yisas Kapov. Yeah, I think this is a very extreme kind of situation. It's not, when a person gets older, he has certain stains on his hand, but I don't think it reaches the level that we're talking about Ba'akanios. They're mamish spots, one after the other. Akumos Lo Yisas Kapov. Right? His hands are what's called krum. Well, it wasn't in krum a hand. It's akmubius. And it's bent in the wrong direction. Akushos means his hand goes like this. It's like bent over to the side. Omer of Asi, Chafni, Ubayshani, Lo Yisas Kappa. Someone who comes from Haifa or from Beit Shan is disqualified for Birchas Kohen. And the reason for that is because those Jews who came from those two locations mispronounced the letters Aleph and Ayin. And therefore, Birchas Kohen, if it says Yo'er Hashem Panav Eilecha, and your air is with an aleph, but they can't differentiate between an aleph and an ayin, so they read it as your air, right, with a guttural sound of an ayin. Now he has a note here. He says the word panav, countenance, may connote anger. So Birchas Kohen would sound like a curse. May God pour His anger toward you. So he quotes here the Mishnah Berurah that nowadays we don't differentiate so much between an Aleph and Ayin, and all Kohanim are kosher. They should currently Alfin Ainin Ele Ainin Alfin Amar Rabbi Rabbi Chia the Reb Shimon Bar Rebbe. Had you been a Levi, you'd be possible for duchen. Now, the duchen was set up for the Shiras HaLeviyim, so it means you'd be possible for Shira. Why? Mishum di avi kolach. You have a very thick voice. Yeah, this is a question about Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a whole sugya where the Moshe Rabbeinu, as a kfad peh, had a very thick voice, and he would be possible for Shiras HaLeviyim. Mishum di avi kalech asa amalei le'avua. Reb Shimon told his father Rebbe that which he heard from Reb Chia. Amalei. So Rebbe responded to Reb Shmuel. Zil emalei kota Reb Chia kishata magia etzel lechikisi lashem. Lo nimtzeis mecharef umegadif. This is a pasuk in Yeshaya. And I will hope to God, will you not be a found reviler and blasphemer? I guess Reb Chia also had a problem with pronunciation, and he pronounced the ches as a hey. And when it says v'chisi l'Hashem, he would read it as if it said v'chikisi l'Hashem. Omar Papa, Omar Afuna, Zavlagon lo yisas kappa. If he has flowing tears from his eyes, he should not do it. That also is a psul. Now, according to the Rambam, it means he's constantly drooling and his saliva is going down to his beard. So Gemara asks the following question: there was someone who lived in the neighborhood of Huna, and he was a Kohen. So he had excessively tearing eyes, and Rav Huna allowed him to duchen. So Gemara answers, "Hahu dosh be'irohav." He was very familiar. He lived in the city. He was local. They were all accustomed to his behavior patterns. They didn't stare at him. They weren't distracted. It was not esech hadas from the brachos. Tanya nami hochi zavlagon lo yisa es kappa. Someone who has excessive tears, tearing, should not duchen, but im hayadosh be'iro mut. Rabbi Yochanan suma biachas meinav lo yisa es kappa. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? He's blind in one eye and he's puzzled. He says, "Vahu davi shimusa Rabbi Yochanan davi paras v'yade." There was a person who was blind in one eye in Rabbi Yochanan's neighborhood, and he was paras as hashma. I'm sorry, he was paras as yada. It's the kapaya. How could Rabbi Yochanan allow that? So the Gemara answers again, "Ahu dash be'irohav." If he's a familiar figure in this town, then it won't create hesech hadas because they're accustomed, the congregants are accustomed to, they won't stare at it. If his hands are stained with paint, dye, he should not do him. Tana, we learned in the Bryson, right? A lot of people have the same occupation and they have the same problem with these dyes. And therefore, the Kohanim are allowed to do. Nobody's going to stare at his hands if Rov Anshe Ir Malachton Bekach. Like, for example, he says, let's say it's a city of dyers, D-Y-E-R-S. So it's common people to have stained hands with dye on it. Therefore, the Kohen is kosher lisas kach. The Mishnah says, "Over any over lifnei teva b'tzvuin." I will never stand as a shliach tzibur wearing colored clothing. It's af b'levanim lo yavar. Such a person will not allow him to be yored b'fnei hateva, to be the shliach tzibur, even if he's wearing white clothing. We'll have to see the sugi. Besandal eno over. He says, "I will not go and serve as a shliach tzibur in sandals." Is therefore af yachef lo yav. We're not going to even let him be a shatz barefoot. Ha'oset tfilas al gula. If he makes his tefillin shall rush round sakana v'ein ba mitzvah. This has to do with the tztukim. Nisan al mitzcho or al pas yodo, harezu derech haminus. If he puts the tefillin on his forehead, not above the hairline, or on his palm, the part of his hand, instead of up on the top of his arm, that's called derech minus. And tzipon zav with a sana al beis unkeli shalo hareza derech achitzonim. So he covers his tefillin with gold, or places his tefillin shel yad on top of his sleeve, on top of his beged. That's called derech hachitzonim. Okay, there are a bunch of notes here on this Mishnah. Let's just see if we can summarize them. The Sadducees interpreted the Torah literally, a defiance of the authority of Torah Sheba'al Peh. They placed their tefillin on their forehead and their palm because it says in the Pasuk Al Yodecha and Beinei Necha, and they took it literally. And we, based on Torah Sheba'al Peh, determined that the tefillin shel yad should be placed on the bicep, opposite the heart, and Beinei Necha for tefillin shel rosh means above the hairline, where the baby's skull is still tender. Now we have a case of someone who made boxes of gold instead of leather, or alternatively covered the leather box of his tefillin with gold. Now, what does it mean? These are people who follow their own judgments. And they disregard the judgments of Chazal. When he covers the parchment of his tefillin with gold, Chazal told him that's not right. Because it says, L'mantia Toras Hashem beficha, which means that anything that makes up tefillin has to be beficha, whether it's the bottom, whether it's the cloth inside, material that can be placed into your mouth, meaning from a kosher animal. And he's covering it with gold. That's not min amuta beficha. Or if he wears his tefillin shel yad on his sleeve, and Chazal say that it's got to be directly on the arm. And in all these cases, where he's a suspect of heresy, my timer, why is it if somebody refuses to serve as a shliach tzibur when he's wearing white clothes, or when he's wearing sandals or not wearing sandals, why do we exclude him from being a shliach tzibur? We're really afraid that maybe he's an idolater, maybe he's a heretic, and therefore we have to disqualify him from serving as a shliach tzibur. Osa tfilas hagula, sakana ve'ein ba mitzvah, lema tnina lahad tan rabbanan. Shall we say that which we derive from our Mishnah, we can derive from a brisa? And what does it say here? It says, Tefillin merubaz halacha l'moshe misina, Yom Rava betifran ubalaksanon, in their stitching and in their diagonal. So both the Mishnah and the Brisa teach that tefillin must be square. And Chazal teach us that the diagonal of a perfect square is 1 2/5 times the length of each of its side, of one of its sides. So one must be careful that the diagonal of his tefillin meets this requirement. Now the Mishnah disqualifies not only round tefillin, but it also says that poses a danger to the wearer. However, only tefillin rounded at the bottom as well as at the sides can penetrate the skull and therefore be considered dangerous. And dangerous means he might bump the tefillin when he enters into a low doorway, and the capsule might penetrate his head. So the Mishnah, it's possible to conclude that only tefillin in the shape of a sphere that resemble an egg or a nut are unfit for the mitzvah. Rounded tefillin with flat bottoms would be acceptable. And therefore the Mishnah cannot be cited here to corroborate the ruling of the Brisa Rav Masechet Davidna Bei Amzuga. He made his tefillin round like a nut. And that could not be, no inference could be made for the Mishnah to support that ruling of the Brisa, that tefillin must be square. Okay, then, so here we'll finish up for today in the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf of Dalid Amud Beis. Take this opportunity to wish you a great day.